You're listening to Life Repair Recovery Talk Radio with Rick Thompson, only on LA Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Rick Thompson. Welcome to Life Repair Recovery Talk Radio. I am not politically correct, nor do I have a filter. My mission is to provide a safe platform for those who are still suffering from various forms of addiction. I'm just a guy who's been there and is willing to listen and offer suggestions to help those in crisis. Welcome to the broadcast. Tonight we have a special guest in the studio, Tom F. During a career highlighted with commendation and awards, he had been the head of a Massachusetts Detective Bureau and K-9 unit and served on an FBI task force and the school committee. He served his community as a coach, as the town D.A.R.E, drug abuse resistant education officer. He spoke to parents and teens about the growing prescription drug problem. I feel very fortunate to have him in the studio because his story is a tragic adventure on how a person can be on top of the world in his profession and then through an operation become a victim of addiction and lose everything. Good evening, Tom, and welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me, Rick. And I mean it sincerely when I say it's my pleasure to be here. It was suggested to me that there may be some interest in having me on the show. I did a little bit of research, a little bit of background on the show, its mission, etc. And I couldn't have been any more pleased with what I had seen. I think it's a very noble thing that you've taken on here, and obviously very necessary too. So I'm humbled to think that there might be some way that I can communicate something that would affect somebody's life in a positive way. So
fantastic.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, man, it's a privilege. It really is. Tom, can we start this off? I want to ask you if you could please share with our audience your story from the beginning, what happened, and how you arrived at the place where you wanted to change your life and get sober.
Okay, that's a big question, so it might take me a little bit of time to answer that.
Go
so
right
bear
ahead.
with me if you would.
Go right ahead. Take your time.
I ask myself that question from time to time, and I remember not too long ago, it was probably just over the summer months, that I traded in this car that I had. And it was an older car. I'd had it for about 12 years. It was a good family vehicle, and it had this sort of funny recorder on the overhead console. And I hadn't used it, I think, for the majority of the time that I had owned the car. And for some reason, when I had gone to trade the car in, I pushed the play button, and I listened to an old recording that was from many years ago. My kids were very small at the time, and I could hear on the recording them laughing and whatnot. And I just stopped for a minute, and I just said, oh, man, there's really no other expression that could adequately or accurately address the way I felt at that time. Just that, oh, man, that exasperation, because way back then at that time, I could never have seen my winding up where I did most recently. And I often think, how do I explain that? How do you describe the unexpected? And when I have the chance to tell my story, I often fail to find an adequate way to label it. And I often refer to it simply as the story I was never supposed to tell.
Right.
And I remember when my kids were little, I would give them lessons on life to try to prepare them for circumstances and whatnot in life. And so one of those lessons was on stranger danger. And I would begin by asking them, what does a stranger look like? And the kids would always describe something, scary, something that was readily identifiable as having the potential to cause them some kind of harm, a furry monster of some sort. And, the purpose of the lesson was to explain that the stranger is not a boogeyman. The stranger looks normal.
Correct.
And when I think about the drug addict, and I ask, what might a drug addict look like? People may have some preconceived notions of what a drug addict may look like, but, my message is to explain to people that, a drug addict, very much like a stranger, looks normal. You really can't tell the difference. The only difference with the stranger, stranger is simply someone that you don't know, but today, more than likely, the drug addict is someone that you do know.
That's inaccurate.
I believe it's the CDC suggests that 1 out of every 10 people is likely to know someone who's been affected by this disease. That's a pretty profound figure when you think about it. Yes. 1 out of every 10 people.
Yeah, it's a lot of people.
And my message, that's a lot of people, right? And so, and my message basically is to tell folks The addict or the alcoholic is not the guy that lives under the bridge or, roams in an alleyway. There are sons, there are daughters, our parents, our grandparents, and I think one of the reasons why we're seeing such a dramatic increase, really, it does have something to do with young people trying, drugs at a party on a Friday night, but a lot of it today has to do with post-surgical addiction and post-surgical pain management.
That's correct. I've had a lot of people on this show, like yourself, that have gone through that exact nightmare.
Yeah, it's something that it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. According to the CDC, about 1 out of every 5 people that's prescribed an opiate painkiller is likely to become addicted. And here in the United States, we use about 80% of all the opiate painkillers in the entire world. So, throughout the course of my career, I've had a lot of opportunities to speak to different groups under a number of different titles based on my education, my experience, and supposed expertise in various areas. I've spoken at trainings and conferences, civic groups, drug forums, and, today is different. My title is much different. Today, when I speak, I often do so by introducing myself by saying, "Hi, my name's Tom, and I'm a drug addict." And I'm not the guy that lived under a bridge, And two, I'm not a movie star, professional athlete. I was a friend, a coworker, and a respected member of my community. So, as I think about how the hell did I get here, there's actually a couple of contexts in which I asked myself that question. In the prior context, there's a question I asked myself when I eventually woke up in a bed and detox. I said, how in the hell did I get here? Because my story was one that suggests that it wasn't supposed to happen to me. I didn't fit into that stereotypical preconceived notion of what the life of a drug addict might be. I had a good upbringing. I had strong parents of high moral character. My father was in the military. My parents brought us to church. My father was a military veteran. He retired from the military. He pushed me to go to college. I kind of wanted to pursue his footsteps, either pursue a career in law enforcement or go into the military, and he pushed me to go to college. I later went back and got a master's degree. I graduated at the top of my police academy class. After just a couple of years in the police department, I was appointed to the detective bureau. I was promoted to the rank of sergeant at an early age. I was given responsibilities like gang intelligence, terrorism intelligence. I taught the D.A.R.E program part-time during my off hours in local schools. I was in charge of our special response team. I was in charge of our canine unit. And then at one point, I was recruited to participate in an FBI task force. It was a Safe Streets Violent Crimes Task Force, investigating mostly drugs and crimes of violence.
Can you explain to our audience for just a second what D.A.R.E stands for?
Yeah, D.A.R.E is a program that was popular probably in the 90s, drug abuse resistance education. And it was about developing relationships between police and kids in the schools. And the intention was that if you were to introduce a program to these kids when they were in the 4th or 5th grade, that was the targeted age group,
right,
that it would be considered it would have a large effect on prevention. It was really a large prevention program.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I passed a thorough FBI background check. I didn't have any negative remarks on my record. I had a flawless record. During the course of my career, I shook hands with 2 different directors of the FBI. I graduated from the FBI National Academy, which required a second background check. I was placed in charge of the Detective Bureau for my PD for about 10 years, investigating felonies. And I received awards and commendations, and I was very involved. I was very involved in my community. I was very much into helping people. I was elected to the school committee. And I was never into politics per se, but I thought the fees that students had to pay in order to play sports were exorbitant. And I'd spoken to family members and whatnot who had 2 or 3 kids, and it was expensive for them to be able to pay for those fees to have kids play sports, do those positive alternative activities that were designed to keep them out of trouble.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I was a coach. I was a volunteer. I've been married for 26 years, and I got 3 awesome kids who've chosen career fields in which they too can help people. And along that journey, I saw firsthand the consequences of addiction. I investigated numerous robberies, bank robberies, armed robberies, often which, the motivating factor was pursuit of money to buy drugs. I conducted numerous interviews trying to understand it. I investigated a number of deaths. I went to all the autopsies, and despite all the things that I had seen, all the things that I had done, and the good things in my life, none of that was enough. And what I learned from this experience was that there's no human resource rep that's screening resumes to determine who's eligible for the disease.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, too, I spent a significant amount of time not understanding it. Like a lot of people, I just didn't get it. You've probably heard the saying, if you don't got it, you don't get it.
That's true.
And I was one of those people.
That's very true. Until you get it, and then when you get it, you sure understand it quick, don't you?
Yeah, it's amazing.
I want to ask you. I want to interject for just a second here. Can you answer a question I've always wanted to ask a current police officer, or ex-police officer? How do you compartmentalize the nightmares that you guys see on a daily basis? I mean, the stuff that people can't even wrap their heads around. How did you do that without using drinking or anything prior to the incident happening that took you out?
Well, I'll say this. I think that one way that we often look at it is that we take it as our jobs. And in the performance of your duty, you're not really recognizing the emotion or whatnot that takes place. The average person probably doesn't see a lot of death, a lot of trauma, crisis, etc. And in the course of my duties, I didn't really stop to look at it as being such either. I looked at it more like, this is my job. There are certain things, tasks that I need to perform in order to get this job done. So it really wasn't so much when the event was taking place, but, it's those types of scenes that would wake me up in the middle of the night. It'd be those types of scenes that I would have dreams about. And, and oftentimes in those career fields, in law enforcement, there's high rate of alcoholism, there's a high rate of suicide and whatnot, and we would drink those things away. We would solve a bank robbery, and we would go and, go down to the bar and celebrate. There'd be a tragic accident and whatnot, and we would go down and drown our sorrows. So,
do you think that you had any
something.
do you think you had any inference of becoming an alcoholic before the?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think at that particular time in my life, I had a satisfaction switch, I guess I'd say, where I had I could cut it off. I could stop.
Okay.
I can imbibe, but I could stop. I was what we called one of those normal drinkers,
right,
at the time.
That's how I run.
And so I could control it. But then what happened to me was that I was judgmental. When I looked at those cases, I investigated certain cases and whatnot. I thought that this is something that just created more paperwork for me. We get a rash of burglaries in a particular area, and as I investigated that, I would think to myself, well, so and so lives in this area. He's a drug addict. It's probably going to be him, and that's how I looked at it. And I looked at it as being a moral dilemma. I thought it was a weakness. I thought, people had discipline issues. And I remember so much so that a friend of mine had come back from the military, and he was a good guy. He really was, and he still is today, I should say. And but he'd gotten injured. He was prescribed OxyContin at the time, and over the course of time, there was some trouble that was stirring. His parents had come to me. They had some concerns about what was going on, missing money, etc. So I intervened, and I was able to find him a place for treatment. And I remember along the way, I'm giving him this pep talk, like I was a coach. I'm saying, you can do this. Rely on your discipline. Rely on that military training and that discipline. And, when I look back now, I think, man, how naive I was at the time.
Because that's not going to help.
Yeah, exactly.
Good luck with that.
And I thought, I'm going to cure this guy in the way.
Oh,
he's not even going to need to talk to a counselor because I'm going to have it all solved for him.
And then you're going to need to talk to a counselor right after it.
Yeah. But then, I was athletic. When I was a kid growing up, I played a lot of sports, and I continued that into my adult life. I continued playing organized sports like softball, touch football, etc. I got involved with triathlons. So I was doing a lot of running. I was pounding the pavement. I was swimming a few times a week. I was bicycling, etc. And over the course of time, as I got into my mid to latter 40s, it started to take a toll on my body. And in particular, it started with my shoulders. and I had torn 2 rotator cuffs on the back of my right shoulder, and they required surgery. And
how many times were you operated on?
No, I'm sorry.
How many times were you operated on?
Well, the right shoulder was the first time, and then it was the left shoulder a few months after that, and then eventually I had my hip replaced. But what happened, there's actually this profound experience that I had after my first shoulder surgery. I went in, I came out, and I began taking the Percocet that were prescribed to me. And at the time of my surgery, I was given a nerve block, and it was going to be like a scale. One of the scale was going to go down as the other one came up. So as the nerve block wore off, the medication I was taking was to increase, within my blood levels, et cetera, and that would sort of balance out the transition of pain management. Mm-hmm. As I continued throughout that day, I would take a couple more. It wasn't working. I'd take a couple more. And in the evening hours, I was in an incredible amount of pain. About 11 o'clock at night, the nerve block had worn off, and I paced my house the entire night. I walked around in a circle the entire night until 8:30 in the morning when the doctor's office opened up. And I called the doctor's office and said, hey, I am in an incredible amount of pain. They said, well, did you take your Oxycontin? I said, no, I didn't get any Oxycontin. So I was supposed to have had a prescription filled prior to my surgery that I was taking once I got home. My wife goes, picks up the prescription, and if you think back just briefly to when I had talked about my career, all the things I'd seen, all the things I'd done, my communication with drug addicts, the deaths, the autopsies, interviews, robberies, crime, etc. All the while thinking that'll never happen to me, not in a million years, mm-hmm. man. This is a character defect. This is a moral dilemma. This will never happen to me. And I take that first Oxycontin, and I'll tell you something. After about 45 minutes or so, that thing kicked in, and my spontaneous utterance at that time was, wow.
Yeah, wow.
I said, I can see how people can get hooked on this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it completely took me by surprise. And I won't say at that point I was addicted, but I'll tell you what, a light went off in my head like I had never experienced before. It was a euphoric experience that I recognized over the course of time didn't just eliminate my physical pain, it also relieved any psychological
mm-hmm. type
pain at the same time. But I was able to set it aside at that particular time, and then, as I had said, I had a second shoulder surgery. And admittedly, I knew what the effects of that medication was going to be, and I was looking forward to taking it. I thought to myself, wow, this is going to be great. I'm going to take a couple weeks off of work. I'm going to have my shoulder done. I'm going to take that good medicine. And never, at the time, thinking that I was going to have trouble coming off of that medicine. And I noticed this time around that I had developed a tolerance from just the previous time. I began to use more. I began to need a little bit more to get the same effect. And this time, when it came time to stop the meds, I noticed there was a little bit of a tug of war that took place. I thought, oh, wow, maybe just one more day, I said, I was able to stop at that particular point. But as I had said, my hip was having issues. This was probably sometime later, a year and a half or so later. And I was trying to hold off on having my hip done. There was the summer months or things that had to be done around the house. There was overtime to be made, vacation schedules, and vacations that had to be filled and whatnot. So it's a busy time in the police department. And I remember at that time I went to my primary care and I was looking for painkillers. And at that time, for the first time, they gave me a prescription for Percocets, just something to hold me over until my surgery. And the second time when I went back, the doctor says, no, I can't do that for you this time. So I went to my surgeon and asked the same question, and with some convincing, mm-hmm. they gave me a prescription, reluctant to do so.
Right.
And when I called again, they was like, no, we're not going to give you anything else before your surgery. So, there's this common thing, I guess, that happens in the pain pill world, that being that, people commonly let people borrow their pills. People were loaning me, well, I say borrow, they're basically giving me their prescriptions. And I should have known better at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was the wrong thing to do, but I think what makes it a problem is that it's perceived as a medication and not drugs. It doesn't wear the devil horns like some of the other illicit street drugs do.
Right, but the disease had already kicked in, so you were already snookered at that point.
Something that's a pretty insightful point, because really? And I didn't know it at the time. I was justifying at the time. I was rationalizing at the time. I was explaining to myself, well, I'm going to keep on working. I'm going to do this. I'm doing the public a service here, so this is okay for me to do. I know what I'm doing. I've already had 2 shoulder surgeries, so I'm kind of like a doctor myself at this point.
Oh, of course you are.
Thinking that I had the knowledge and the ability to kind of self-prescribe, and they're only medications.
Dr. Tom.
Rationalizations. Yeah. So then when I had my hip done, I was prescribed Dilaudid, which is a very powerful form of morphine. It's like 8 to 10 times stronger than morphine. It's highly addictive. And when I went home with that was basically the beginning of the end for me. Mm-hmm. And like you had mentioned, too, I was probably already hooked before my surgery based on what was going on. Mentally, I'm sure that I was. Mm-hmm. And I noticed, too, I needed more to get the same relief. And at one point, I really started to recognize there was something wrong. This is when I really started to know something was going on. So I thought to myself, as I healed and time went on, I thought to myself, I'm going to stop here. I had this brief window of sanity. And I began to have a terrible feeling. I was feeling terribly sick, and I really didn't know why at the time. I called my doctor, and he goes through a litany of possibilities, and he says, well, did you stop taking your medication? I says, yeah. And I was almost insulted at his response.
You negated to tell him when. There's that small point.
Yeah, well, he says, well, it sounds like you're going through withdrawals. And I said, withdrawals? Me? Withdrawals are something that's associated with a drug addict. That can't possibly be me. Mm-hmm. And the response at that time to remedy those circumstances was to give me another prescription. But the idea was to wean myself off over the course of time. Mm-hmm. And, that just wasn't working. Every time I stepped down, I was getting sick. So I called my doctor back, and the answer was, well, let's give him another prescription this time with even more, and you can wean yourself off slower that way. And I don't,
So they were upping the dosage of the drugs that you were already on so you could wean yourself off?
Well, the dosage itself remained the same, but the quantity that they had given me increased, with the idea that, well, instead of taking 3 days at each step down, let's stretch it up to 5 days for each step down, to wean you off slower.
Right.
And, I know there's a lot of blame that's placed on doctors, et cetera, and I really think that I had good doctors at that point. My doctor who had done my hip he was a great doctor, and I just think that was simply the protocol at that particular period of time. There wasn't this awareness or level of awareness that we have nowadays relative to the epidemic. So at one point, as I was stepping down, I continued to get sick, and I just said to my wife, listen, I got to stop. I just got to stop and do what I got to do. And I just went cold turkey. And I was miserable, to say the least. It was like a flu times 10. I was just sweating and, vomiting and, et cetera. And I won't say hallucinations. I was having these really vivid dreams. I still remember those dreams today, some of them. And they still give me that same miserable, nauseous feeling thinking about them. So it was a miserable experience, to say the least. I must have been in bed for about 5 days. I think it was on the 5th day. I finally came out. My hair is a mess. I'm all sweaty and wearing the same clothes. My bed is soaked. And I thought to myself, that's it. Famous last words, right? I'll never do that again.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I knew nothing about relapse. I didn't know that there was no cure. I thought that I had just gone through an exorcism of some sort, and it was never going to happen to me again.
Well, you did, kind of.
As you probably. Yeah, in some ways I did. I didn't realize that you can't turn a pickle back into a cucumber. It's we're on the East Coast. We kind of make fun of the Malibu thing. Admittedly, we say, you don't go away to a program in Malibu, and you're cured. Mm-hmm. This is a chronic disease that wants you dead. You fight it for the rest of your life.
That's correct.
And, but I didn't really recognize that particular time in my life. And I wound up going back to work, and I was on light duty at the time. And there's a particular incident that had occurred. There's a young man who I'll say was one of us. And there's this large bridge that separates my town from the neighboring community. And he wound up jumping off the bridge, taking his life.
Jesus.
And, I investigated a number of cases like that before. But this particular one, what was troublesome for me is that his poor mother called me almost every single day. And she had these hopes that I was going to find him, that he was going to be found alive. And,
yeah,
I didn't want to tell her at the time, but, listen, I've done this a number of times. It was like January that he had jumped off and there was ice below and whatnot. And,
right.
There's going to be a thaw, and in the spring the water's going to rush and his body's going to stir up and float, and we're going to be able to find him.
Right.
But I wanted her to have some kind of closure. I felt bad for this woman. So I'd go down by the riverside. I'd wander around. I'd say, you know what? Boy, I'm a little sore. I'm just going to take one of those pills.
Right.
And then that one turns into, I want to get to sleep tonight. And that's the way it happened for me. It wasn't this, addiction didn't happen to me in one immediate fell swoop. And when I talk about addiction to folks, especially those who don't have it or haven't experienced it, I say it's like drawing these little lines in the sand. You draw this line, you tell yourself, I'll never cross that line. And then you wind up taking just a little step. That's all it is, by just little decisions, choices that you make at that time.
Mm-hmm. And pretty
draw
soon,
another line in the sand.
Yeah, right. And pretty soon you don't even remember where the first line that you drew was.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're a mile back. You can't even see that first line. You go, how the hell do I wind up, here? And the same downward spiral began again. I began to get withdrawals. And that's a scary thing. Withdrawals are enough to send a lot of folks back into, using or continuing use. And the bottom line is that at that point, I broke the law. That was the tragic part of this whole thing. I broke the law.
How did you do that?
Despite my background, the commendations, the recognition, the associations I had, everything being so positive, this disease just brought me to a point where I wanted what I wanted, when I wanted it. And, I had this pharmacy, so to speak, at my disposal. A pharmacy is otherwise known as my evidence room. And, I just began to call my name, and I would visit the evidence room, and, I would say to myself, okay, just this one time, because you're going to get sick. And that's it. You'll take it. You'll feel better. You wind up getting through the weekend, and then you'll be fine. And then the next day, I go back. Okay, just this one more day. And at one point, someone asked me, why didn't you just take everything all at once? Why didn't you just do it all in one time, one shot? I said, because every day was my last day.
Right.
I was never going to do it again.
Sure. Every
single day. My thinking was just incredibly obsessive. I wasn't thinking about if, but it was when. I basically lost my ability to choose. And then at one point, as the disease progressed, I was switching sides of the Titanic, so to speak. I was switching to other drugs and whatnot.
What kind of drugs were you doing?
Yeah. I was using the OxyContin, Percocets, and then at one point I actually thought to myself, okay, well look, because this is how, my mind worked at the time, how scientific I was. I said, I haven't used cocaine before. This is a stimulant. I know that if I use this, it'll create the opposite effect of this, and therefore maybe I can get off the pills with this, I'll switch to this, and I'll be able to quit this instead, because I knew I wasn't able to quit the pills at that point.
Right.
So I became a real yo-yo, a seesaw. I was doing pills, or, I started doing cocaine by day, and I was doing my pills at night. I was using benzos. I was drinking heavily also. I had this seltzer can. I would empty a seltzer can, and I'd fill it with vodka, and I'd sit in my chair, and everybody thought that I was drinking seltzer. And
what does your wife say about all this when she started noticing the differences in your behavior?
She definitely recognized differences in my behavior, and she would comment on it. She was inquisitive, but I became a master manipulator. Mm-hmm. I became a master liar. I became the opposite of everything I had aspired to be. I was a man of honor and dignity, and I turned into a liar and a thief. Mm-hmm. And, what was amazing is I became so good at lying. I became so good at hiding it. I'd say, I had a bad day. I just had a few beers, or I took a Xanax and had a few beers, or something along those lines.
How about your kids? Did your kids ever notice your behavior patterns switching up?
They did at the time, but they didn't know what it was until later on. You know, at one point, my kids actually started calling me by my first name. They actually started calling me Tom, one of my daughters in particular. The reason being is that I would sit in this chair and I'd have that seltzer water full of vodka, and I'd ingested a couple of pills at the same time. She would be, Dad, hey, Dad.
Right.
And she'd be, you know, trying to get my attention.
Right.
And here I was just in this fog, this funk.
Right.
And, you know, the only way she finally said, Tom, and I turn and look at her, you know. So I don't know, you know, they knew that something was going on. They knew that something was wrong, but they couldn't put a finger on it necessarily. They didn't know exactly what was going on. And, you know, at some point it came to everyone's attention, and I was arrested. I was in my office one day. I'd been elevated, to the rank of lieutenant, and I was sitting in my office, and all of a sudden my door comes open, and it was guys that I knew. You know, guys that I knew. They were assigned to the state police unit of the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts, and they came to the door, and you know, I got to tell you, that would be a scary experience for anybody, you know, especially a guy in my shoes and my position. And you know, what I knew at that moment, I knew what no one else did at that time, and I was relieved. Mm-hmm. For a minute there, I was actually relieved.
Sure.
I said, "Oh my God, I'm going to live. This is finally over."
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons being too is that I knew what was the next step was. You know, as we hear with so many stories, as it goes from, you know, the OxyContin to heroin, that very night, my intention was to snort heroin for the first time. And my disease is definitely the disease of more. More. I was going to die. I was either going to have a stroke or I was going to die. You're on your way to the embalming
table, no doubt. No doubt.
And so I felt as though at that moment I had this sort of epiphany. Man, I'm going to live. I'm going to live through this thing. Mm-hmm. And I went away.
Were these guys IA guys? Were these internal affair guys that came in to get you?
No. Okay. These are guys that they're just assigned to a different unit. They're assigned to the Attorney General's office.
Okay.
With the state of Massachusetts.
That's pretty serious.
And yeah, without a doubt. Normally, a case like that would be investigated by the district attorney's office. But in my circumstances, and you know, my familiarity with certain people, you know, I had friends who were DAs and ADAs and all that and whatnot, and friends who worked out of the district attorney's office. So I think, you know, their thing was to defer it to someone else. So, yeah, and that's when I was brought to the state police barracks. I was booked. I was arraigned in court. I was plastered all over the news at the time, and I remember coming back home because the idea was I was going to go for treatment. And I remember I was laying in bed. I was crying. I was an emotional wreck. You know, my emotions went to hell in a handbasket despite having had that brief epiphany when I realized what was going on and whatnot. And my middle daughter, I mean, God bless her, she was blessed with the gift of brutal honesty. As I lay there, I said, Maddie, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. I love you. And she says, I love you too, Dad. But I'll never look at you the same way again. And that was tough, man.
That's tough.
That was so tough to take. You know, I mean, I completely pulled the carpet out from underneath him. You know, I was going to be the police chief in my town. You know, I was not going to be the guy that got arrested and was all over the news. You know,
right? Sure.
So I went away. You know, as they say, Kirby, because that's what we do, right? With addicts, we send them away. And in some ways, it suggests that the farther we send them away, the better that they're going to get. And I wound up going to a detox and treatment center, and you know, it was difficult. Believe it or not, it was difficult at that time. I remember everybody's going around the room, and they're identifying as either an alcoholic or an addict and whatnot. And I thought to myself, that's not me. I am not going to say that. I'm not saying that I'm an addict. You know, I was going to be. I had that terminal uniqueness. You know, they don't know my background. They don't know my story. And I finally got to my turn. I don't know what hit me. I finally said, yeah, my name is Tom, and I'm an addict. And I'll tell you, that moment just set me free. it set me free. Despite the arrest and everything else, I thought, no, there's a little hump. I'm just going to go over this. I'm going to be okay. But when I said those words, it set me free. When I admitted that I was powerless over this thing, it made a tremendous difference in my life, because I think that the level with which I could admit my powerless was going to determine the success of my recovery at some point.
Yeah.
And, I got to see firsthand what a lot of addicts really look like. It wasn't so much the people that I dealt with, over the course of my career.
Mm-hmm.
I saw this elderly woman who had broken her hip and was hooked on painkillers, began buying them off the street after her doctor had cut off her prescription. A high school pitcher, a young kid, steps off of a mound, breaks his ankle, and months later he's a heroin addict. I met every walk of life, business people, artists, etc.
Yeah, I've seen them. That's true.
So it opened up my eyes, and then as I returned to my community prior to my court date too, folks would come up to me, they would approach me, and, hey Tom, I heard about what happened. I just want you to know this. People from all walks of life, and fortunately, they would trust me and reveal to me what had been going on with them and all that. So it was much more pronounced than I had ever dreamed of, much more than I had ever thought. And fortunately for other folks, they're able to find a solution without having to be arrested. But one of the things that I often talk about is it's a disease that arrests your choice, your ability to choose. You don't choose addiction; it chooses you. At 48 years old, there's no way I would have chosen to throw my life away and to ruin everything.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it just wasn't supposed to be this way. I had moments in the beginning where I actually thought to myself, man, why couldn't I have just died in the line of duty? I was trained for that. I was ready for that. Rather than this tragedy,
addicts and alcoholics like drama. So we like to think like that. Why did I go out and hail of bullets?
Yeah. Well, at least there would have been, dignity and decorum that I'd earned over the course of my career.
Right.
That's what I had lived up to. But that was initially. That was in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen all sides of this thing, and I tell people there is no choice. It's like this cliff. This is how analogy I sometimes provide to people is. We make certain decisions that bring us to the edge of this cliff. I might say, well, I'm just going to take a little bit more this time. Or my doctor says I'm a bigger guy. It's okay if I take a little bit more. And you slowly walk up to the edge of that cliff. And we've all fallen down at some point in our lives. We all know what it's like where you reach that point of no return,
mm-hmm.
where you're falling. You're falling off of a cliff. You might be grasping for roots or something to hang on to stop you from falling. But the truth is, you can't choose to stop at that point. You're either going to go all the way and hit rock bottom, or if you're lucky, somehow somebody's going to stick out a safety net. And I think for me, my safety net was my having been arrested. But I took the advice of every counselor that I'd come in contact with when I was in treatment at that point, and that was to get into a 12-step program. And that's what I did. I got involved in 12-step recovery. I worked what's called the 90-90, where you go to 90 meetings in 90 days.
Yep.
People made suggestions. They said, get a sponsor. And I was, it was kind of funny, because here I am. I'm going into these rooms, and as I had said, I had that terminal uniqueness. I thought I was the only person that thought this way. I thought that I was the only person who had this level of insanity. But I'm hearing people speak and hearing people share, and I'm going, oh my God, that's how I thought too. Right. And that's really how, that similar symptomology and our way of thinking is how I recognize this to be a disease. It really is a disease.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm texting my friends, I'm like, yeah, you'll be amazed before you're halfway through, and I think I'd been in rooms for about 30 days at that point. I was amazed with what I was coming to understand. And then someone said at a meeting, hey, if you're new, get a sponsor and work the steps. I was like, wow.
Right.
Okay. So I began that process. I got a sponsor, and I began working the steps of the 12-step recovery program of my choice anyhow. And, I start to look back, at different events that had occurred. One of those, I talk about, well, there was one point in particular where I was looking at myself in the mirror, This is before everything, before my arrest. And I remember being in the bathroom, and I didn't like what I saw. And I was trying to look into the eyes of the guy who was on the other side of the mirror to see if, the man I once was still inside of me. I saw the shell. I was a man without a soul at that time. And I remember thinking, oh my God, my kids and my family, it might sound weird, but I was thinking about my dog that died. Maybe if someone has had a pet that they love, they can relate to that. I was relying upon everything that was good in my life to help me in that situation. And I began crying. I had this epiphany, so to speak. It was just this huge emotional breakdown. And I remember saying, God, please make this stop. Make this stop. Why can't I stop this thing? I was a person who had tremendous strength in my life. And why is it that I can't stop this one thing? And my experience had taught me that I could enhance or increase the effectiveness of my pills if I began crushing them and snorting them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I had crushed a pill prior to having looked at myself in the mirror. And I wound up taking it in that moment, and I swept it down the sink. I turned on the water, and went back, and I sat down. And one of the analogies that I use to explain to people about the disease of addiction is it's like these fan blades that spin inside your head. And each fan blade has a different label on it. And one might say, you want it. Go get it. I need it now. Mm-hmm. Well, you don't have to stop today. You've already started today. Let's just start fresh tomorrow. So these fan blades just keep on adding up, and they spin. And as they spin, they increase. And as they spin faster and faster, they gain strength inside your head, and it's almost like a turbine that's spinning, like a jet engine with so much force that an hour later, I was back in that bathroom snorting that pill.
Yep.
Despite having had this huge emotional breakdown,
Yeah, we've only got about 4 or 5 minutes left here, Tom. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to inject a couple of questions at you.
Go right ahead.
What were the specific crimes that you were charged with and arrested for, and what was your experience in prison being a former law officer?
Okay, 2 excellent questions. I'll be really quick with the first one. I was charged with possession of a Class B substance, which in Massachusetts is cocaine, possession of a Class B substance being OxyContin, and then I was also charged with stealing from an infirmary or repository, that being my evidence room. That qualifies as a felony in the state of Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. So I did go to court. I had about 14 months where I was working the steps, working my program, and the Attorney General's office wanted 2 to 3 years in state prison. Fortunately, I had some people that supported me, spoke on my behalf. The judge sentenced me to 2 years in jail, a county facility. So I did about a year under the custody of the Hampshire County Sheriff's Office. Mm-hmm. Did about 9 months behind and about 3 months or so on a bracelet. Mm-hmm. But my jail experience, I'll tell you something. The short version is jail sucks.
Yes, it does.
I would never want to do it again. However, I would never take that experience back. I would never take it back. And this whole journey that I've been on, I say continuously that God has dragged me through his boot camp of humility. Because along the way, I met some wonderful people. I met some great people in jail. I met some guys who had my back, guys who were smart, guys who were funny, guys who were just like me because they had my disease. Right. And I deserve what I got. I'm not, and I needed what I got because for me, I needed to have had that penance in order to live with myself again, and be comfortable and move forward.
How is your relationship with your family now?
Over the course of time, we build trust, and we're doing well. Everybody's happy. We're whole. I got out of jail, and I went back to school, and I received a certification in drug and alcohol counseling. I'm currently working in the field as a drug and alcohol counselor, and I'm still very active in 12-step recovery. I sponsor guys in the program, and I take the opportunity in situations like this to share and speak, and everybody does okay. We're building our lives, and we're putting everything back together again. And what I thought was once a curse has certainly been a blessing. Right. My ability to help people has been magnified tenfold, and I know that if I get up every day and I live the life of a man in recovery, and I just do the next right thing every day, and I turn my will over to God's will, which sometimes isn't what I want, but it's the mission that He wants for me. And I was a guy who was good at missions, and how lucky am I to have suffered and gone through something like I did, so that I could turn around and use it to help somebody else.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good. So how has this experience changed the way that you view the disease, like your alcoholism and the drug addiction and the treatment plans that are in place?
Well, it's changed dramatically. I certainly have. I had this ability to identify with the addict or alcoholic. I had the ability to communicate with that addict and alcoholic. I certainly see it as a disease. I believe in removing the whole stigma associated with the disease, because I was really hooked on that stigma. And I forget exactly what the statistic is, but I think it's something like only 10% of the people that need help will actually go get it. And I think I was one of the people who was in that remaining 90%. That being that I thought I was above this. I thought that I couldn't get this. I thought that people were going to look down on me.
Right.
And how much easier my life would have been had I just gone and got the help that I needed when I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I found, too? This has been an amazing journey in that, the solution to this problem really is it's about the language of the heart. It's about the love of one addict or alcoholic for another. And I'm one of those people. I have that affinity towards people who have this disease because I've got it too. And when I was a young man, I had my heroes in life, Rocky Balboa and Arnold Schwarzenegger and all that, but they never showed up for me. When
they usually
things
don't.
went wrong. What's that?
They usually don't.
Yeah, absolutely not. But you know what? The people in recovery did. The strong men in my life, in other words, the powerful people, they were there to help. But the people in recovery are the ones that showed up. Those are my heroes today. Someone who's got 10 years or 10 months or just 10 days, because I know how hard that is. And for a guy like me, where I come from, despite everything that I had done, it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life.
Understood.
And I know that I can't do it alone. And I'm grateful to those folks that are out there. There's millions of Americans who are out there in recovery today.
Yep.
Millions of Americans who are out there today.
That's true. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time on a Sunday evening to visit with us. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that the audience got a great deal out of this adventure. Hopefully we can do this again. And I really personally am grateful that you came on tonight to talk so people can hear your side of the story and what you've been through as a former law officer, that anybody is susceptible to this disease at any given moment. And I look forward to speaking with you again soon. And thanks again for coming on. Have a good evening.
I appreciate it, Rick, and thank you for everything you do.
All right. Have a good night. Okay. You can't beat that. It blows my mind. The people that I've met since I've been sober, what they used to do is amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. We were sponsored tonight by Linsanity Rock Band of Palmdale, California. You got to love this. We take the money wherever we can get it. As I sit here and I think about what this man just told us, I mean, can you imagine working your whole life being completely straight, and then you get one rotator cuff and they give you some medication, and the next thing you know, you're off and flying, and it destroys your life. I'd like to take a moment and ask everybody to say a little prayer for my friend Jerry Ross. He's in the middle of a storm right now, and I'm hoping he's going to make it through. He's been a guest on my show, and he's a great man that I have a great deal of love and respect for. We're at the end of this week's show. Make sure to tune in next week for another hour of brutally honest Recovery Talk Radio. The corporate website for Life Repair Recovery Talk Radio is www.liferepairrtr.com. That's www.liferepairrtr.com. I'm not a politically correct guy, nor do I have a filter. My mission is to provide a safe platform for those who are still suffering from various forms of addiction. I'm just a guy who's been there, and I'm willing to listen and offer suggestions to help those in crises. I leave you now with a dose of reality from my friend in the afterlife, the great John Flynn.
Disappointment Disappointment is the caboose on the train of expectation. Anything you want from anybody, you give them what you want from them. It's the only way you're going to get it.
You're listening to Life Repair Recovery Talk Radio with Rick Thompson, only on LA Talk Radio.